So it's nice to be here with all of you enjoying the weather this evening. A couple of weeks ago, my girlfriend, her mom, and I went to see the play The Lion King in Hartford. And The Lion King, the movie and the play were a favorite of mine when I was a child. And an interesting thing happens for me when I watch movies, my movies that were my favorite as a child. Because as an adult, they are a little bit different. I see them in a very different way. And so a few different things will happen when I go back and watch one of these old favorites. Sometimes I'll watch and think like, why did I like this movie? It's so terrible. And I can't see what the appeal was at the time. Or I'll watch something and discover that there were jokes that I never understood when I was younger. I think what happens most frequently when I'm watching the movies that I loved as a child, when I go back and watch them, I think the most common thing that happens when I watch the number of like otherworldly creatures are interacting with humans. My most common thought is like, I was a weird kid. I was super weird, and I have this urge to text my sister and be like, oh, I get it. Okay. We used to go to pick out our movies back once upon a time when you had to leave the house to get a movie and go and pick out your VHS tape. But we would go as kids, and she's a couple years older than I am, and we would each pick out a movie, and every time she would inevitably look at what my selection was and just like, you're so weird. Why? Why do you like these things? Of my favorites include, if anyone has seen any of these, Labyrinth and The Never-Ending Story. All right, so.
I'm so glad you said that.
I love it, and one of my favorites was Return to Oz, and not the Wizard of Oz, not like the bright colors and the happy songs, but the weird, twisted kind of sequel to that. So I'm happy to hear I have some company here. But not all of the movies that I watched as a kid were so peculiar. I did also like a number of maybe more popular favorites. But these, I think I have a different reaction to watching some of the movies that I think were more popular among my generation. Going back and watching them, I often find myself yelling at the screen, sort of in frustration. And watching Sleeping Beauty, I yell at the prince that no means no, and sleeping also means no. You can't just kiss a person that you find unconscious. Or at the Little Mermaid shouting about you need to get to know each other. You have to have a conversation and get to know each other. She's more than just a pretty face. And then I start shouting out the patriarchy, and I probably don't finish the movie. So it was nice to go back and watch The Lion King and have a very positive experience. Some things do hold up well over time, and I think I still saw The Lion King in maybe a little bit different way from how I did when I was young. And seeing the play is exciting. There's such great costumes and music and everything is really fun. And I was really looking forward to that piece of it. And I had some general, remembering of the basic plot of The Lion King. And so I imagine most folks have seen it at this point. If not, I'm going to spoil the entire thing. It's been around for a couple of decades now, so I imagine most folks have seen it. But spoiler alert! So when Simba is the main character, when Simba the lion was a cub, he really looked forward to becoming king when he got older, and he sang a song about how he was so excited because he was going to be able to do just whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, and there weren't going to be any rules, and his enemies should beware. He was practicing down on others. And he was really focused on the fun that he would have. And I think as a child, I sang along with this thinking, like, that's what adulthood's going to be like. I wasn't looking forward to being king, but I'm looking forward to that time when there are like no rules and I can do what I want, no responsibilities. I probably, like Simba, was ignoring other people's advice that I was going to have some responsibilities. Simba's dreams, though, of doing what he pleased didn't quite come true. He ran away before becoming king. Simba's uncle, so in the story, Simba's uncle, Scar, kills Simba's father and makes Simba believe that it is his own fault and convinces him to run away. So Simba does. And Scar then is able to take the throne for himself, something that Scar wants only for the power of it and not because he is concerned with those he is governing. And so Scar's poor governance then leads the animals to the brink of starvation, and they're living in this way for years before Simba's childhood friend Nala sets out to find some food and some help. And I think so probably in this movie I start shouting about the monarchy because like this person should be leading clearly, or this lion. But so when she's on her journey out Nala finds Simba, which is surprising because he was assumed dead. So she was angry and also excited and kind of feeling all of the things, and tried to convince Simba to come back, but he refused her requests. And Simba doesn't finally agree to go back to his community until after he gets some strong guidance from the wise Rafiki, who urges Simba to look deep within himself. And Simba kind of resists that at first, but Rafiki is very persistent, and she helps Simba to prepare. Oh, in the play that we saw, Rafiki was a woman, and that was very exciting also. So she helps Simba prepare. So this preparedness to lead people as a young king is the same that we're reading about in scripture this evening about King Solomon. King Solomon becomes king when his own father dies, and when that happens, King Solomon seeks some guidance from God at the start of his reign. In the scripture passage that we read, King Solomon states that he feels childlike and unprepared, though he has at least already gained enough wisdom to sort of know that being king is not only about his own desires and entertaining his own desires. So when God tells Solomon to ask anything, Solomon says, "Give your servant therefore an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this your great people?" God is really impressed with this request, and King Solomon doesn't ask for riches or victory over his enemies, but asks for understanding about how to govern his people, this great people, and how to discern between good and evil. And so being so impressed by this, God grants this request and even just throws in some riches and some honor for good measure. I have been wondering what the one question is that I can ask God that's going to get me a yes, and also here's all the money. I have not figured out that question yet. If anyone else has, I'd love to learn. But until that time, while I'm still figuring that out, I will seek wisdom wherever I might find it. Which requires looking deep within myself and admitting what I don't know, finding God within and in all the experiences around me. So in leaning on God for wisdom and discernment about good and evil, I gain the wisdom that's necessary to guide my relationships and actions with others, not as king, but as a person in the world who experiences the world. In our second reading today from the book of James, James states that the wisdom that comes from God is first pure, then peaceable, gently willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. So from this passage, we can gain some wisdom about how we might interact with other people, how we might exist and coexist in the world, and advice not just for kings, but kings and their subjects, but also for all people learning to live in the world together. So to be peaceable and gentle with one another, to yield when appropriate, and to have mercy, because in building relationships and learning to coexist, we will sometimes make mistakes. And it's from those mistakes, though, that we can learn and gain wisdom. Wisdom of God who is manifest in all things, and who manifests in our relationships with one another and our larger communities. Wisdom of God who is manifest in all things, and who manifests in our relationships with one another and with our communities. So the individual and communal relationships that bind us together are what the Lion King characters might talk about as the circle of life. And learning to be fully engaged in that circle means not only showing up, but also putting in some effort to gain the wisdom that would guide our relationships and the way we treat people. So like Solomon, it requires admitting what we don't know, what we need to learn to grow. Like the wise Rafiki instructs Simba to do, it takes, when preparing for the throne, it takes looking harder, looking deeper within ourselves, and looking deeper to find God with God's wisdom. How we interact with other people and how we treat others is a sign of the wisdom that we've gained, the wisdom that we've gained from God. And this wisdom guides an understanding that all people are beloved, and all people are worthy of love and respect. Something that is forgotten when our focus turns to self-centered. So in our reading from the book of James, he gives this an account of what wisdom from God is like, but he also talks about when we don't seek wisdom from God, that leads to envy and selfish ambition disorder, and wickedness. So this is not something that we see just in the power-hungry Scar and the Lion King, but in our own lives as well. And I think these factors that drive these factors can drive our own actions if we don't seek God's wisdom and guidance. But these selfish ambition, envy, disorder, and wickedness are perhaps most evident in our political arena and our capitalist business structure, where power is hoarded by the many by the few, hoarded by the few to control the many. And this fear-based control leads to mistreatment, judgment, harm, and limiting the rights of different people. Too often it permeates within our society. It is these actions that we must work to overcome, both in our actions and in the actions of others. So we can take a note from King Solomon and learn more. And as we learn more and gain wisdom about how to be in right relationship with others and how to care for the needs of others, we must also work to share this knowledge with those who are ready to receive it. And perhaps with those who are not so ready, we might take a page from Rafiki's book and maybe be a little bit more persistent and forceful. When we see the selfish ambition controlling the actions of those in positions of power, we might learn from Nala and take bold action that is required to do what is right to care for others who are being mistreated by those in power. So together, doing this bold work to be sure that all people are cared for, guided not by judgment and fear, but by wisdom gained from God. When we admit to what we do not know, look harder and seek guidance, and together we can build a peaceable community. Amen.